Arthur Conan Doyle, The Return of Sherlock Holmes. The Adventure of Black Peter, Part 1. I have never known my friend to be in better condition, both in mind and body, than in the year '95. His growing fame brought him a very large number of clients, and I would be careless if I even suggested who some of the famous people were who came to our simple rooms in Baker Street. Holmes, however, like all great artists, worked for the sake of his art, and, except in the case of the Duke of Holderness, I have rarely known him ask for a large payment for his valuable services. He was so uninterested in money, or so unpredictable, that he often refused to help rich and powerful people if the case did not interest him, while he would spend weeks working very hard for a poor client whose case had strange and dramatic features that attracted his imagination and tested his skill. In this memorable year '95, he worked on a strange and mixed series of cases. These ranged from his well-known investigation of the sudden death of Cardinal Tosca, an inquiry he carried out at the direct request of His Holiness the Pope, to his arrest of Wilson, the famous trainer of canaries, which removed a serious problem from the East End of London. Soon after these two famous cases came the tragedy of Woodman's Lee, and the very unclear circumstances around the death of Captain Peter Carey. Any record of Mr. Sherlock Holmes's work would not be complete without including this very unusual case. During the first week of July, my friend was often away from our rooms for long periods, so I knew he was working on something. The fact that several rough-looking men came during that time and asked for Captain Basil made me understand that Holmes was working under one of the many disguises and false names he used to hide his strong and well-known identity. He had at least 5 small hiding places in different parts of London where he could change his appearance. He told me nothing about his work, and it was not my habit to force him to share it. The first clear sign he gave me about the direction of his investigation was very unusual. He had gone out before breakfast, and I had just sat down to eat when he walked into the room, still wearing his hat and carrying a large spear with a sharp, barbed head under his arm like an umbrella. "Good gracious, Holmes," I cried. "You don't mean that you have been walking around London with that thing?" "I went to the butcher's and back." "The butcher's? And I come back with a very good appetite. There is no doubt, my dear Watson, about the value of exercise before breakfast. But I am ready to bet that you will not guess what kind of exercise I have been doing. I will not try." He laughed as he poured the coffee. "If you had looked into Allardyce's back room, you would have seen a dead pig hanging from a hook on the ceiling, and a man in his shirt sleeves stabbing it hard with this weapon. I was that active man, and I have proved to myself that I cannot push this weapon through the pig with one blow, no matter how hard I try. Perhaps you would like to try?" "Not for anything, but why were you doing this?" "Because it seemed to me that it might be connected in some way to the mystery of Woodman's Lee. Ah, Hopkins, I received your message last night, and I have been expecting you. Come and join us." Our visitor was a very alert man, about 30 years old. He wore a simple tweed suit, but he still stood straight like someone used to wearing a uniform. I recognized him at once as Stanley Hopkins, a young police inspector. Holmes had great hopes for his future, and Hopkins showed the respect and admiration of a student for the scientific methods of the famous amateur. Hopkins looked worried, and he sat down with a feeling of deep sadness. "No, thank you, sir. I had breakfast before I came. I stayed in town last night because I came yesterday to report." "And what did you report?" "Failure, sir. Complete failure." "You have made no progress?" "None." "Oh dear. Then I must look into the case." "I truly wish you would, Mr. Holmes. This is my first big opportunity, and I do not know what to do. Please, come and help me." "Well, It happens that I have already read all the available evidence, including the report of the inquest, very carefully. By the way, what do you think about that tobacco pouch found at the place of the crime? Is there no clue there? Hopkins looked surprised. It was the man's own pouch, sir. His initials were inside it, and it was made of sealskin, and he used to hunt seals. But he had no pipe. No, sir, we could find no pipe. In fact, he did not smoke much, but he might have kept some tobacco for his friends. No doubt. I only mention it because if I had been working on the case, I would have started my investigation there. However, my friend Dr. Watson knows nothing about this case, and it will be useful for me to hear the events again. Please give us a short summary of the main facts. Stanley Hopkins took a piece of paper from his pocket. I have a few dates here that show the life of the dead man, Captain Peter Carey. He was born in 45, so he was 50 years old. He was a very brave and successful hunter of seals and whales. In 1883, he was the captain of the steam sealing ship Sea Unicorn from Dundee. He had several successful journeys, one after another, and in the next year, 1884, he retired. After that, he traveled for some years, and in the end he bought a small place called Woodman's Lee, near Forest Row, in Sussex. He lived there for 6 years, and he died there 1 week ago today. There were some very strange things about the man. In normal life, he was a strict Puritan, a quiet and gloomy person. His household included his wife, his daughter, who was 20 years old, and 2 female servants. These servants changed often, because it was not a pleasant place to work, and sometimes it became impossible to stay. The man drank heavily at times, and when he did, he became like a devil. He was known to force his wife and daughter out of the house in the middle of the night and beat them through the park, until the whole village outside the gates woke up because of their screams. He was once taken to court for a violent attack on the old vicar, who had visited him to complain about his behavior. In short, Mr. Holmes, you would have to search far to find a more dangerous man than Peter Carey. And I have heard that he was the same when he was captain of his ship. People in his trade called him Black Peter. This name was given not only because of his dark face and the color of his large beard, but also because of his moods, which frightened everyone around him. I do not need to say that all his neighbors hated and avoided him, and I have not heard a single word of sadness about his terrible death. You must have read in the report of the inquest about the man's cabin, Mr. Holmes. But perhaps your friend here has not heard about it. He had built a small wooden building for himself. He always called it the cabin, a few hundred yards from his house, and he slept there every night. It was a small hut with 1 room, about 16 by 10 feet. He kept the key in his pocket, made his own bed, cleaned it himself, and did not allow anyone else to enter. There were small windows on each side, which were covered by curtains and never opened. One of these windows faced the main road, and when a light was on inside at night, people used to point at it and wonder what Black Peter was doing there. That is the window, Mr. Holmes, which gave us one of the few clear pieces of evidence at the inquest. You remember that a stonemason named Slater was walking from Forest Row at about 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 days before the murder. As he passed the grounds, he stopped and looked at the square of light still shining among the trees. He says that he clearly saw the shadow of a man's head turned to the side on the curtain, and that this shadow was certainly not Peter Carey, whom he knew well. It was the shadow of a bearded man, but the beard was short and pointed forward in a way very different from the captain's. That is what he says. But he had spent 2 hours in the public house, and the window is some distance from the road. Also, this happened on Monday, and the crime took place on Wednesday. On Tuesday, Peter Carey was in one of his worst moods. He was drunk and as dangerous as a wild animal. He walked around the house, and the women ran away when they heard him coming. Late in the evening, he went down to his hut. At about 2 o'clock the next morning, his daughter, who slept with her window open, heard a terrible scream from that direction. But it was not unusual for him to shout when he was drunk, so no one paid attention. When they got up at 7, one of the maids noticed that the door of the hut was open. But everyone was so afraid of the man that it was midday before anyone dared to go and see what had happened to him. When they looked through the open door, they saw something so shocking that they ran to the village with pale faces. Within an hour, I arrived and took charge of the case. Well, I usually have strong nerves, as you know, Mr. Holmes, but I promise you that I was shaken when I put my head into that small house. It was buzzing loudly with flies, and the floor and walls looked like a slaughterhouse. He called it a cabin, and it really was like one, because you would think you were on a ship. There was a bed at one end, a sea chest, maps and charts, a picture of the sea unicorn, and a row of logbooks on a shelf, just as you would expect in a captain's room. And there in the middle was the man himself. His face was twisted like someone in great pain, and his large, rough beard stood up in his suffering. A steel harpoon had been driven straight through his broad chest, and it had gone deep into the wooden wall behind him. He was stuck there like an insect on a pin. Of course, he was dead, and he had died at the moment he gave that final scream. I know your methods, sir, and I used them. Before I allowed anything to be moved, I carefully examined the ground outside, and also the floor inside the room. There were no footprints. You mean that you did not see any? I assure you, sir, there were none. My dear Hopkins, I have investigated many crimes, but I have never yet seen one that was done by something that flies. As long as the criminal walks on 2 legs, there must be some mark, some small damage, or some tiny change that can be found by a careful investigator. It is impossible that this room, covered in blood, had no trace that could help us. However, I understand from the inquest that there were some objects which you did notice. The young inspector reacted with discomfort to my friend's ironic words. I was foolish not to call you at that time, Mr. Holmes, but that cannot be changed now. Yes, there were several objects in the room that needed special attention. One was the harpoon used to commit the crime. It had been taken from a rack on the wall. 2 others were still there, and there was an empty space for the third. On the handle was written SSC Unicorn, Dundee. This suggested that the crime was done in a moment of anger, and that the killer had taken the first weapon he could find. The fact that the crime happened at 2 in the morning, and yet Peter Carey was fully dressed, suggested that he had arranged to meet the murderer. This idea is supported by the fact that a bottle of rum and 2 dirty glasses were on the table. Yes, said Holmes. I think both ideas are possible. Was there any other alcohol in the room besides rum? Yes, there was a case with brandy and whiskey on the sea chest. However, this is not important for us, because the bottles were full, so they had not been used. Even so, its presence has some meaning, said Holmes. But let us hear more about the objects that seem important to you. There was this tobacco pouch on the table. Where on the table? It was in the middle. It was made of rough sealskin, the kind with straight hair, and it had a leather string to close it. Inside, on the flap, were the letters PC. There was about half an ounce of strong ship's tobacco inside. Very good. What else? Stanley Hopkins took a small notebook with a gray cover from his pocket. The outside was rough and worn, and the pages were discolored. On the first page were the letters JHN and the date 1883. Holmes placed it on the table and examined it very carefully, while Hopkins and I looked over his shoulders. On the second page were the printed letters CPR Then there were several pages of numbers. Another heading was Argentine, another Costa Rica, and another San Paulo, each followed by pages full of signs and numbers. "What do you think of these?" asked Holmes. "They seem to be lists of stock exchange investments. I thought that JHN were the initials of a broker, and that CPR might have been his client." "Try Canadian Pacific Railway," said Holmes. Stanley Hopkins swore quietly and hit his leg with his fist. "What a fool I have been," he cried. "Of course, you are right. Then JHN are the only initials we still need to understand. I have already checked the old stock exchange lists, and I cannot find anyone in 1883, either inside the exchange or among the outside brokers, whose initials match these. Still, I feel that this clue is the most important one I have. You will agree, Mr. Holmes, that it is possible that these initials belong to the second person who was present, in other words, the murderer. I would also say that the presence of a document connected to large amounts of valuable investments gives us, for the first time, a possible reason for the crime." Sherlock Holmes's face showed that he was very surprised by this new information. "I must agree with both your points," he said. "I admit that this notebook, which was not shown at the inquest, changes the ideas I had formed. I had a theory about the crime, but I cannot include this in it. Have you tried to trace any of the investments mentioned here? Inquiries are now being made at the offices, but I am afraid that the full list of shareholders of these South American companies is in South America, and it may take several weeks before we can trace the shares."